I stood by the window in my small kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring my tea in an old porcelain cup, a familiar ritual that provided a small comfort against the chill in the air, when I heard a knock at the door. It was an unexpected and sharp sound that startled me, ripping through the quiet solitude of the evening. The sound felt louder in comparison to the gentle sound of the rain as it drummed against the windows. Outside, the rain poured, a gray and relentless downpour, as if the heavens had decided to empty their entire reserves onto the earth in a single evening. It was the early days of October, a time when nature prepared for winter's embrace, with leaves already turning yellow and the wind snatching them from the branches, casting them into puddles that mirrored the somber sky. This season always brought a sense of melancholy and contemplation, making one reflect on the passage of time. I stood by the window in my small kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring my tea in an old porcelain cup, a familiar ritual that provided a small comfort against the chill in the air, when I heard a knock at the door. It was an unexpected and sharp sound that startled me, ripping through the quiet solitude of the evening. The sound felt louder in comparison to the gentle sound of the rain as it drummed against the windows. Soaked from head to toe, he stood on the porch, attempting to shake the water off his jacket, his movements burdened by the weight of the moisture. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his rain-soaked shirt clung to his body, accentuating his athletic build. Despite the chill emanating from the open door, a warm feeling stirred within me as he offered a slightly apologetic smile. "Lydia Pavlovna, I'm sorry for coming so late," he said, shifting from foot to foot, his discomfort evident. "The car broke down not far from here, and with this rain, well, could I wait it out here?" The inconvenience seemed to weigh on him. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Of course. Come in. Don't stand there in the doorway. You're soaked through." It was the least I could do given the circumstances, but I couldn't help but feel a subtle flutter in my chest at his presence. I closed the door, shutting out the relentless noise of the rain, and suddenly felt the confines of my small house closing in around me. Andre removed his jacket and hung it on the coat rack by the entrance, and I couldn't help but steal a glance at his shoulders, at the way the fabric of his shirt stretched as he reached up. The moment felt intimate and charged with an unspoken tension. "Sit down," I said, gesturing towards the kitchen table. "I'll make some tea. It will warm you up." The offer was a simple gesture of hospitality, but I was acutely aware of the charged silence that hung in the air between us. He nodded gratefully and sat down, and I turned to the stove to boil the kettle, a mundane task that seemed to amplify the unspoken emotions swirling around us. While the water was heating, I could feel his presence behind me, unobtrusive but palpable, like a faint electrical current running through my skin. The silence seemed deafening, punctuated only by the sound of the rain drumming against the windows. "Where's Sveta?" I asked, breaking the silence, my voice sounding louder than intended. My daughter, his wife, had always been an invisible barrier between us, a shield against any inappropriate thoughts or feelings. "She went to a friend's for the weekend," he replied, and I detected a hint of weariness in his voice. "Said she'd be back tomorrow evening." He spoke neutrally. I poured tea into a large mug and placed it in front of him. Our fingers brushed briefly as he took the mug, and I felt the warmth of his skin in stark contrast to the cold he'd brought in from the outside. The brief touch was intimate and unexpected. "Thank you, Lydia Pavlovna," he said, looking at me. His dark, deep eyes seemed to search my soul. I turned away, feigning busyness, washing a spoon which was already clean. "Enough with the Pavlovna," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Just call me Lydia. We're family." I hoped the familiarity would ease the tension. He smiled wryly. A warm, almost intimate sound in the silence of the kitchen. "All right, Lydia," he said, and I felt my name sound different on his tongue, softer than usual. It was an almost imperceptible shift, but I couldn't ignore it. The rain didn't stop, and I suggested he stay until the weather improved. The roads were hazardous, and it was getting late. He agreed, and I took an old towel from the cupboard to dry himself off. When he took it, our hands touched again, and this time, he didn't hurry to let go. The soft fabric suddenly felt alive with the anticipation of an invisible spark. I felt my cheeks flush and hurried away, muttering something about checking to see if the roof was leaking in the living room. I quickly retreated to the living room, as I could not hide my blush in the living room. It was warm, and the fireplace crackled merrily. I showed him to the couch, offering that he make himself comfortable. The warmth was inviting and comforting, and I hoped it would help dispel the chill he must be feeling. He sat down, leaning back against the cushions, and I noticed how his still damp shirt outlined the contours of his body. The image was fleeting, but it was enough to stir unexpected feelings within me. I forced myself to look away and busied myself with poking at the fire. Even though it was already burning steadily, it was important to maintain an appearance of normalcy. "It's cozy here," he said, looking around the room. "Quiet." He seemed to appreciate the peaceful atmosphere, so it was something that I hoped would bring him solace during his unexpected detour. "It's because I live alone," I replied, and I thought I detected a note of sadness in my voice. "Silence. It's my constant guest." My words hung in the air, a reminder of my solitude. He looked at me, and there was something in his gaze that I couldn't decipher. Perhaps sympathy, or something else entirely. I quickly turned away, as I did not want him to see me. "Sometimes silence is good," he said quietly. "But sometimes you want someone to break it." He said it so suddenly that it felt intimate and charged, and it was like the room became hotter at that instant. I didn't respond, but his words hung in the air, heavy as the damp autumn evening outside. The rain continued to beat against the roof, and I knew that the night would be long. I knew it was a night of reckoning. He nodded gratefully and sat down, and I turned to the stove to boil the kettle, a mundane task that seemed to amplify the unspoken emotions swirling around us. While the water was heating, I could feel his presence behind me, unobtrusive but palpable, like a faint electrical current running through my skin. The silence seemed deafening, punctuated only by the sound of the rain drumming against the windows. The rain outside didn't let up, and I caught myself thinking that I didn't want it to stop. He seemed unaware of the dangerous path we were on. "Maybe I could dry your clothes?" I asked, trying to distract myself from my thoughts. You'll catch a cold sitting there wet, I offered, so the moment would pass. I sat in an old armchair opposite the couch where Andre was sitting and tried to focus on the cup of tea in my hands. But my gaze kept drifting back to him, to his relaxed posture, to the way he stared pensively at the flames, as if they could answer some of his questions. The flames seemed to dance with the heat that rose inside of me. It's no trouble, I replied, standing up. Come on, I'll find you something old to change into. I must have some of my husband's shirts somewhere. I stood up and led him to the room. I led him to the bedroom, where boxes of things were stored in the closet, things I hadn't yet decided to throw away after Pavel's death. Andre followed me, and I felt his presence behind me, close, almost palpable. It was an uncomfortable place to be. The bedroom was cramped. The scent of old wood and lavender sachets, which I had placed in the closet, filled the air. It was the smell of my memories. He smiled, and there was something boyish, almost disarming, in that smile. No, Lydia. I'll dry. I don't want to trouble you. Here, I said, holding out a gray shirt that had once been Pavel's favorite. I think this will fit. I prayed that he would not notice my discomfort. He took the shirt, and his fingers brushed mine again. This time, he held my hand a little longer than necessary, and I felt the warmth of his skin spread through my body. It was as if the room grew smaller, and my heart grew larger. I quickly turned away, pretending to search for something else in the closet. But my heart was beating so loudly that I was afraid he would hear it. His gentle nature stirred a desire within me to know more. Thank you, he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made me turn involuntarily. I had to fight the urge to reach out and touch him. He looked at me, and I could see something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Not just gratitude, but something deeper, warmer. It was a gaze that made my heart race and my senses reel. Change in the bathroom, I said, trying to speak evenly. I'll put the kettle on, again. What nonsense, I thought. He's my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. How dare I imagine otherwise? But in the kitchen, while the water in the kettle was heating, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. There was no way that the tension between us could be dismissed. This evening, this rain, his unexpected appearance, it all seemed to be pushing us towards some invisible boundary. Was it destiny or chaos? When he returned to the living room, already in the dry shirt, I noticed that it fit him a little looser than his own, but still emphasized his physique. He sat on the couch, and I, to occupy my hands, began to adjust the logs in the fireplace. He seemed at ease. Lydia, he suddenly said, and I froze, not turning around. His voice was soft and smooth, like a tempting melody. You are always so caring. There was a slight hesitation, but the question was clear. I laughed, but the laugh came out nervously. What, shouldn't I be? I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Someone has to take care of you young people. I hoped he could not tell I was flustered. He didn't answer immediately, and I felt the silence between us become heavier. The longer he was here, the more dangerous the situation became. I turned around, and his gaze caught mine. He was looking at me as if trying to say something, but couldn't find the words. It felt like he saw past my soul into my core. "Sometimes," he began, "it seems like you take care of everyone but yourself." He was now sitting upright with a concerned expression. I was taken aback. His words touched something inside, some old wound that I had tried not to think about. I was now at a loss of words. I wanted to say something sharp, to brush it off, but instead I simply looked at him, feeling the warmth from the fireplace, mingling with the warmth that was rising within me from his words. The fire seemed to lick at my emotions. "Maybe you're right," I said at last, and my voice was quieter than I had expected. "But what of it? Life is like that." His words cut deep. He got up from the couch and took a step towards me. I involuntarily stepped back, but my back hit the wall by the fireplace. He stopped, not coming any closer, but his presence still filled the entire room. I was now trapped. "Life," he said, "shouldn't just be about taking care of others. You deserve more, Lydia." He was intense and sincere, and I knew what I was doing was wrong. I didn't know what to answer. The unspoken words of lust and desire clouded the air. The rain outside had subsided, but my head was buzzing like a hurricane. I watched him. I was looking at him, at his serious face, at the way the light from the fireplace played on his cheekbones. And I knew that this evening would never be just an evening when my son-in-law came in to wait out the rain. His eyes were like burning embers. The silence in the room became almost palpable. It felt like this would change me forever. Andre was standing a step away from me, and I could feel the warmth of his breath without even looking at him. He exuded strength and desire, and he was dangerously attractive. The fireplace crackled, casting golden highlights on his face. I suddenly caught myself staring too long at his lips, at the way they trembled slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. I had to escape. "Andre," I started, trying to steady my voice. "Maybe you should sit down. The tea will get cold." But I was merely a puppet. I hoped that these words would diffuse the tension, but he didn't move. The heat from the fire and the warmth of his desire rose. Instead, he took another half step closer, and I felt my heart beat faster. I was now suffocating in my own home. I pressed my back against the wall, as if searching for support, but this only intensified the feeling that there was nowhere to retreat. He was as close as he could possibly be. His eyes, dark and deep, seemed to be looking straight into my soul, and I couldn't look away. I was trapped in his gaze. "Lydia," he said quietly, almost in a whisper, and my name on his tongue sounded like something forbidden, but infinitely desirable. His words were tempting. "I don't want tea." His rejection was a shock to me, but not unwelcome. I swallowed, trying to find the strength to joke, to brush it off, to return everything to normal. But the words stuck in my throat. My body seemed to have a mind of its own. Instead, I felt his hand slowly rise, as if he wanted to touch me, but froze as if afraid to cross the line. He hesitated. This gesture, so hesitant and full of tension, made my body respond with a warmth I had long forgotten. I started to shake. "What are you doing?" I whispered, but my voice was weak, almost pleading. The tension in the room was palpable. I didn't know what I wanted more. For him to stop or to continue. All thoughts fled my mind. He stammered, and a shadow of doubt flickered in his eyes. I saw something in his eyes, but could not read it. "I don't know. It's just that you're so real." The single word hung in the air. The word real struck me like lightning. I was suddenly reminded that I had been a shell of a person for a long time. How many years had it been since I had heard anything like that? How many years had I been just a mother-in-law, a widow, whose life revolved around caring for others? I felt something inside me crack, as if the thin crust that had been holding my feelings captive had begun to break. My tears rose. I bit my lip. "Andre," I said, and my voice trembled. I suddenly had a strong desire to escape the moment, but I could not. I opened the closet door and began rummaging through the boxes, trying not to think about how close he was standing. Every thought, all logic seemed to cease to exist, and all that remained was temptation. He nodded, but didn't step back. His hand, not having touched me, slowly lowered, but his gaze remained fixed on my face. I became aware of all the small details of his face. "I know," he said, and there was such a mixture of guilt and desire in his voice that I felt my knees weaken. I was now at his mercy. "But I can't stop thinking about you. Not today, not now." His answer came as a surprise and made my heart rise. I closed my eyes, trying to collect my thoughts. He was irresistible. The rain outside had almost stopped, leaving only a light tapping on the windows, but my head was buzzing like a storm. The clouds seemed to surround me. I knew that I should push him away, tell him to go, despite the weather, despite everything. I did not care about the storm raging inside of me, but instead, I opened my eyes and looked at him. And at that moment, something inside me decided. He was like a drug. "This is wrong. You're married to Sveta. You're my son-in-law." It was the voice of reason, the voice of sanity, but it sounded hollow, even to my own ears. I could not tell what to do. "If we take a step back, there won't be another chance." His words rang true. He didn't answer, but his gaze said it all. Everything was clear now, but there were no going back. He took a step closer, and now there were only a few centimeters between us. My desire rose. I could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of damp fabric mixed with something tart, masculine. I could feel his breath on my neck. My hand, as if of its own accord, rose and rested on his shoulder, and I felt his muscles tense under my fingers. I felt heat rise within me, and I was like clay in his hands. "Lydia," he said, and his voice was hoarse, almost pleading. The single word was charged with anticipation. "Tell me to stop." He had given me an escape, but it would be a one-way trip to a boring life. But I didn't say it. I was lost instead. My fingers tightened on the fabric of his shirt, and I felt my body leaning towards him, as if drawn by an invisible force. He pulled me into the fire. His hand finally touched my waist, light, almost weightless, but that touch sent shivers down my spine. The touch made me want to melt. We froze, teetering on the edge, and I knew that the next step would change everything. His touch changed me. The rain outside had stopped, but the room was as hot as in the middle of summer. I knew what was happening. I knew that this night would never be just a night. When my son-in-law came to wait out the bad weather, his presence consumed me. The moment when his hand rested on my waist was like a flash, short but blinding. He was all I could see. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. My breathing became uneven, and I noticed how his eyes darkened as if they were reflecting the same fire that was burning in the fireplace. My desire had risen to the surface. "Lydia," he whispered again, and there was so much emotion in his voice that I felt my own barriers collapsing. I watched him. He leaned in a little closer, and I felt his breath on my cheek. Warm, barely perceptible, but even more exciting. His closeness drove me wild. I felt the warmth of his fingers through the thin fabric of my blouse, and this touch seemed to awaken something long forgotten in me, something that I had buried under years of loneliness and routine. My heart seemed to beat for the first time again. "We shouldn't," I breathed, but the words sounded unconvincing, almost like a plea. His scent filled my nostrils. I didn't know who I was trying to convince, him or myself. I was torn and lost. He didn't answer, but his hand on my waist became a little firmer, more confident, and I felt my body involuntarily responding, leaning towards him. He was now invading my space. His other hand slowly rose to my face, and the tips of his fingers touched my cheek, softly, almost reverently. He wanted me as much as I wanted him. It was so simple, so natural, but that touch sent a wave through my skin that I couldn't ignore. My heart was now a roaring beast. "Tell me to go," he asked, and his voice was low, almost hoarse, as if he himself was fighting something inside himself. He did not move. His eyes searched mine, and there were so many questions, so much desire in them, that I felt my last doubts melting away. It was impossible to refuse him. I didn't answer. I was lost in his eyes. Instead, I did something that I hadn't expected from myself. I rose slightly on tiptoe and touched his lips with mine. He gave me permission. It wasn't a kiss, but just a light touch, like a sample, like a question that I myself didn't know the answer to. The spark ignited, but that was enough. His touch was a temptation. His hand on my waist tightened, pulling me closer, and in the next second, his lips found mine, no longer asking, no longer hesitating. The kiss was gentle and pure. The kiss was slow, cautious, but there was such depth in it, such suppressed passion, that I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. I was falling, and I was loving it. I clutched at his shoulders to keep my balance, and felt his arms embrace me tighter, pressing me closer. There was something desperate in that, as if we both knew that we were crossing the line, but couldn't stop. Our bodies were a map of hidden desires. The fireplace crackled, and its warmth mingled with the heat that was rising inside me. His heat consumed me. I pulled away to catch my breath and looked at him. His chest heaved. His eyes were full of the same fire that I felt in myself. But there was also a shadow of guilt in them that reminded me of reality. He felt the same way I did. "Andre," I whispered, and my voice trembled. I was helpless. This is a mistake. It was a warning, but there was nobody to send it to. He didn't let go of me, but his grip softened, as if he was giving me a chance to back out. His eyes searched mine. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I don't regret it." I was his prey. I closed my eyes, trying to collect my thoughts. His words, his closeness, his warmth, it was all too much. I seemed to be falling through the air with no parachute. I knew that I should push him away, send him home, even if the rain started again. His actions consumed me, but instead, I felt my hand slide across his back, embracing him, and I knew that I didn't want him to leave. I wanted him forever. "Stay," I said, and these words burst out on their own before I had time to think them over. My thoughts came to me in a blur. He looked at me, and there was so much in his gaze: surprise, desire, doubt. His touch stirred my heart, but he didn't argue. I could see the longing in his eyes. Instead, he leaned down to me again, and his lips found mine, no longer cautiously, but with the greed that we had both been trying to restrain. He desired me, I answered, losing myself in this moment, in the warmth of his body, in the feeling that I was alive again, desired again. Our bodies moved without any prompting. The rain outside had finally stopped, but the night was just beginning. And I knew that this choice would change everything. My life was about to be altered forever. We stood by the fireplace, entwined in each other's arms, and I felt time stop, leaving us alone with what we had both chosen at that moment. Our hearts beat in sync. His kisses grew deeper, and I felt the last barriers between us collapsing. I was now his. My hand slid across his back, feeling the warmth of his skin even through the fabric of his shirt. I melted into his touch, and I realized that I no longer wanted to think about the consequences. There was a reckoning to come at this moment. Only we existed. Only the heat of the fireplace and the silence of the house, which now seemed not empty, but full of our closeness. His desire consumed me. Andre pulled away, but only for a moment to look into my eyes. His gaze was serious, but there was also a softness in it that made my heart clench. A new world was about to be opened. What now? He seemed worried. I didn't answer immediately. I was unsure what to do. Instead, I moved closer, putting my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes. Everything was gone. "I don't know," I said at last, But now I feel good. I was now his, and he was mine. He hugged me tighter, and we were silent, listening to the crackling of the fireplace. Our hearts seemed to blend into one. A morning could wait. Sveta, my daughter, could wait. She no longer mattered. The whole world could wait. I was now lost in a forbidden paradise. On this night, we belonged only to each other. And I knew that despite everything that would come later, I would never forget this evening, this rain, this moment when I felt like a woman again. My life was no longer my own. Our story could have ended there, leaving us in this silence, in this warmth. But life doesn't stop, and I knew that morning would bring a choice: to forget or to continue, to destroy or to preserve. But that is another story. And now I was just lying next to him, feeling his heart beat in time with mine. And that was enough.